Welcome back to Paul Jack's Radio on KSDJ 90.7. My name is Zach Winter, and I have two co-hosts here with me today. One of them is new to us today, but Shiloh Smolinski, we know you. You're familiar to us.
Yes, hello.
And then, lastly, Evan. I don't even know what your last name is. So,
Yeah,
Evan.
Evan Olson. Yeah.
Evan Olson. So, yeah, we've got a new co-host with us today. Micah's sadly doing student stuff, as students have to do sometime. But, Shiloh, do you want...
Well for us. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. We want to engage/destroy unbelief and untruth wherever it is found, for believers and non-believers alike.
Yeah, that last part I really love. I love the aspect of it's for everybody. It's for believers and unbelievers. It's a very important topic, I would say. But Evan, you're new here. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit just to people who are listening?
All right. So, I guess, like I said, my name is Evan Olson. I'm an ag science major, sophomore here at SDSU. I guess I've been interested in apologetics ever since I started coming back last spring, and I currently am a regular at Mount Calvary Lutheran Church here in Brookings. I guess, yeah, that's the rundown, basic rundown.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Evan. But let's push come to shove. Let's get into our topic today. Shiloh, you're the guy this week. So what are we going to talk about?
So, this week we're going to get into the resurrection. It is the cornerstone for believers. We're going to talk about historical evidence for the resurrection. We're going to talk about the implications. What does it mean if somebody, Jesus Christ, namely, dies and then gets resurrected 2.5 to 3 days later? Historically, 3 days later. What does that mean? So, again, my name is Shiloh. I've been researching this for a couple months now, and it's been great. And I believe that the resurrection, the historical evidence for the resurrection, is one of Christianity's best arguments for the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, existing, and he rules our world.
Yeah, the way I kind of think about it is there's a lot of arguments you can have within the Christian faith, and as well as just worldviews in general, atheistic, pluralistic, whatever you name it. There's a lot of arguments you can have. But in knowing about this topic, it's one of those things that's like the case almost seems so clear sometimes, and it makes it so succinctly drawn where the lines are that you can't really get around it. I mean, if you haven't ever talked about it with somebody, you really should, because it's something happened. That's kind of clear. Something happened 2,000 years ago that we have to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to get into that a little bit later. Something certainly happened. Skeptics believe that, as well as, of course, Christians believe that something happened. The disciples, they experienced something. We'll get into that later, but I'm glad that you said that Christians, they claim something, and you can't get around the resurrection. Like I said, it is the cornerstone. The Bible says this. It is the cornerstone for believers. Jesus Christ is the cornerstone for Christianity.
Yeah, Paul writes that if, maybe I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but if Christ was not rose from the dead, our faith is worthless, essentially. Like, if it didn't happen, what are we doing? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. So, first up, I want to talk about evidence. What do I mean by there's evidence that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And it means evidence. Let's go over the definition that Google provides. Evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid.
Oftentimes, when you're in historical topics like this, people want proof, but the reality of history is that proof isn't something that's easily given. Like, when you're dealing with history, you have to deal with evidence. You have to make, it's called Occam's razor. You basically go with the thing that makes the most sense or is the most plausible, and that's sometimes all you get in history. And in the case of the resurrection, it's a historical topic, and that's what we have to deal with. We have to deal with what people are writing, what do we have from the time, what do we see from the people living in that time, and we're taking all of that information and we're drawing a best picture, a best conclusion to the topic. So sorry anybody that's listening to this conversation, and we're not gonna be saying that we can give you proof, but we can give you a whole lot of evidence that's hopefully good enough for you, because it's certainly good enough for us.
Yeah. The key distinction there is that we are providing body of evidence, and we're going to see if that indicates to a resurrection. Of course, there's a lot of people in the world, and a lot of them are Christians, so we can safely say that a lot of the world claims that those bodily the body of information does indicate towards the resurrection. Now, we know what we mean by evidence, so what do we mean by resurrected? Jesus of Nazareth, he physically died, his tomb was empty, and he physically rose and appeared bodily. It wasn't a vision or a metaphor. There's an ancient Egyptian lowercase g god named Osiris, and there's basically these claims that Osiris, he was killed, his body was dismembered, and later his wife, Isis, she brings his body back together, and Osiris, he spiritually comes back to life. The distinction here, again, is that Osiris might have, probably not though, spiritually arose. Jesus, the claim is that Jesus physically and spiritually arose from the grave 3 days after the fact.
Important distinctions there. I mean, if you know even a little bit about church history a little bit, these are things that were very, very heated debates back in the 3rd century, 4th century. Ecumenical councils were held over those topics, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about today. So to make the claim kind of clear, is we were saying that Jesus Christ, the man, died physically, dead. 3 days pass, and the man, physically his human body raised from the dead, and he lives again. That is what the claim is. So
Yes, thank you for summarizing that.
what does that mean though? Like, Shiloh, I know something that's big on your heart is, what does it mean if that's true? And that is a big deal, I would say, but Shiloh, take it away.
Yeah, so I've heard a couple times, not unbelievers or skeptics, skeptics of Christianity, not per se. They believe in the resurrection, actually. Some people believe in the resurrection, but they just don't believe in the rest of the stuff. Can you do that? I'm going to go over a couple points where I would say no, and it means more. It means more than a person just comes back from the dead. It means more than that. So point number 1, Jesus is who he claimed to be. He claimed to be God. And this is God's public yes to Jesus' proclamation. Number 2, death is defeated. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. He claims that you can be forgiven of your sin if you go to Jesus. And if he rose from the dead, then this is certainly true. If you come to Jesus, your sin is forgiven and death is defeated, spiritual death.
Yeah. It's a big deal. If Christianity is true and Jesus rose from the dead, what he says is true. or at least if we know what he says is true. And if that is a reality, that's a life-changing reality. That's something that, as we see in the apostles, and we'll get into that later, I'm sure, Shiloh, but if you look at the lives of the apostles, that's what happened, is they got confronted with the fact that, whoa, this dude died, rose from the dead, and now we need to live different lives because we realize the scope and the magnitude of that reality.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And if a person dies and claims that he's going to be risen on the third day, and he actually does, you're going to pay very close attention to what that person says, and that's what we see these disciples doing. So if you today you come out of this and you say, "Hey, I think the resurrection happened," then you are philosophically forced to believe in the Gospels, because the Gospels are the ones that claim the resurrection. Now I am going to provide evidence for the resurrection.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Fact number one. I'll actually start us off, Shiloh. I'm going to steal your thunder a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I was sitting in here waiting for you guys to come, and something came over me like, I should look at Reddit. So if you know what Reddit is, it's not something I frequent, and it's just like, I wonder what happens if I look it up. So I looked up a Reddit post from r/AskTheAtheist. If you know anything about Reddit, you'll know what that means.
It's basically a group of people asking atheists questions
Yes.
in this
So-
specific subreddit.
I did a simple search, and I just asked best arguments against the resurrection of Jesus. And the first comment is, the complete and utter lack of any evidence for it is all you need. It's a story in a book of mythology. Now, there's a lot wrong with that claim.
There's a lot, yeah.
But the thing I wanted to point out to lead you into your first point is that our claim is Jesus existed, and it's not debated in the scholarship, and he was crucified. Those are two, it's kind of a 2-in-1 claim.
Yeah.
But that's our first point, is that Jesus Christ was a real man. He's really here. He's not a mythological figure, and he really died on a cross.
Yeah. I want to read a couple quotes from known skeptics of the resurrection, particularly. This first quote is from Bart D. Ehrman in his book, Did Jesus Exist? Of course Jesus existed, period. Everyone knows he existed. Another quote is from Graham Stanton. Today, nearly all historians, whether Christians or not, accept that Jesus existed.
Yeah, that nearly there is important to maybe even emphasize a little bit. It's like 96% of secular scholars. 96, it's a lot. A large majority
Yeah.
of people agree. Yeah, that's a real dude.
Yep.
It'd be pretty idiotic for somebody in the scholarship to say, no, I don't believe that. But that's often what we run into most of the time in people our age. I mean, we live in an age of TikTok theology where sometimes it's nice to just say the thing that everybody else is saying and not think about it. But when everybody's saying stuff like this, you kind of have to just call it out for what it is. And it's just not true. It's not accurate at all. Nobody that knows anything about the topic says that. So we start there. That's our first kind of fact to claim.
Certainly. And if you're an extreme skeptic, I want to read you. Actually, I won't actually read you, but I will go over a couple testimonies. It's basically skeptics, historians writing during the time of Jesus, writing about Jesus. These guys don't believe in the resurrection. They don't believe Jesus claimed to be the Messiah. But they do attest to the fact that Jesus existed and he was crucified. This first reading manuscript that I want to go over is called Annals 1544. It's from a Roman historian and senator named Tacitus. Tacitus has he has access to imperial records writing about Jesus, so we can know Tacitus to certainly be. He has no reason to lie.
Yeah, he's a big name in the historical field. It's But continue.
Indeed. And in this short writing, 15.44, if you want to check it out for yourselves, we can see that Jesus, a man named Jesus, was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and the crowd styled Christians, and the Christians, their pernicious superstition, basically meaning the false belief that they just wouldn't give up on, the pernicious belief was checked for a moment only to break out once more. Christianity was checked for a moment. We can see through implication this checking is during the time that Jesus was dead, most likely the 3 days, and possibly, but unlikely, a couple days after, only to break out once more. So Christianity explodes again after implying the resurrection. And then later in the text, we can see that Tacitus is humiliating and shaming and talking about how the Christians are being persecuted. So there's at least early proclamation of a resurrection, and people are willing to die for it as well.
Yeah, I'll bring it back to the archaeology kind of show we did a couple weeks ago now, 2-3 weeks ago with Micah, but he brought up Aleximanus Graffito, which is like a cave drawing that's dated like the 1st century or 2nd century, really early on, and it's pretty handedly showing the death of Jesus Christ, and that's evidence right there that it's a real thing that happened. It's not something made up. But that should lead us into our first break. So I'm going to take us to a song here. It's called Oceans by Hillsong United, and I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome back to Apologetics Radio on KSTJ 90.7. My name is Zach Winter, and I'm here with my two co-hosts, Shiloh Smolinski and Evan. I forgot your last name again. What's your last name? Shoot. Olson. Evan Olson and Shiloh Smolinski. And we're here talking about the historical account of the resurrection, the evidence for the resurrection, and why it matters. That was kind of what we spent more so the first half of this, or chunk of this episode, talking about why it matters and what the actual claim is. And we kind of got into the first fact claim that we made of it is a real thing to talk about. It's not just some mythological event. But we are going to get into some more details. So, Shiloh, take us away with your second claim.
Alrighty. Fact number 2. And I want you guys to notice why these are facts. It's important. These are facts. Fact 2. Empty tomb. There's a couple of reasons why people come to the conclusion that the tomb was empty. Number 1, the tomb location is known. In Matthew 27, 57 through 60, we can see that Joseph, he asked for Jesus' body after he was killed. Pontius Pilate, he gave it to him. Joseph wraps Jesus in a linen cloth and takes it to his family tomb. So we have the written account for where the tomb is. And the reason why it matters is that if somebody wants to claim that Jesus rose from his tomb, you can simply go to the tomb and see if that's true.
A little side tangent on the empty tomb where it is. There was, I believe, a Roman emperor went around, or maybe a consul of some sort, went and destroyed all the artifacts of Christianity. But then rolls around the time of about Constantine, there was another Roman official who actually followed his path of destruction and found each one of these artifacts that had been covered up.
You're talking about the Church of Holy Sepulchre?
I'm talking about, I think most of these, like the empty tomb and like where Jesus was born.
I mean, even in modernity, we kind of have a pretty good idea where the actual tomb was, which is very interesting. It's called the Church of Holy Sepulchre, is what I was bringing up. But it's very likely we know where the tomb is in modern day, but they definitely knew in antiquity where the tomb was. It wasn't something that was going to be easily mistaken.
Yep, and that brings us to our to my second point. No body was produced because the high scribes and everybody knew where the body was. And when they heard the resurrection claims, the high scribes and the priests, they made up an excuse for the empty tomb. They said, they bribed the soldiers, and they said to the soldiers, tell people, His disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. Now that's a claim that the high scribes made, but it implies that there was no body in the tomb.
Yeah, the actual fact here is that the tomb was empty. That's what we're saying.
Yep. And then we'll get into why the stolen body argument is not probable later.
Yeah, let's get into our third fact is that there were eyewitnesses, plenty of eyewitnesses that claimed to see the event. I mean, the crucifixion was a public event. It's something that many people saw. And then also an important detail is that in the tomb, the first people to see it were women, and that's very atypical for ancient times for women to be testifying eyewitnesses because they often were just thought of as, in a sense, less than.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't credible.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that many people saw the death of Jesus, and post on, many people's lives were affected claiming that they saw the resurrected Christ. So getting back at that idea of something happened, obviously. This is kind of where that fact is reiterated, where something happened we can see because hundreds of people were martyred. Maybe not martyred is the best word, but hundreds of people were persecuted and continue to be persecuted even for something that people said wasn't true.
And that perfectly brings us into the third fact. People claimed it. Hundreds of people claimed it. We have multiple appearance claims. So in the Gospels alone, there are 11 post-resurrection appearances. And we have the oppositions of Paul and James' testimonies. So Paul and James, they're enemies of the movement. They have no reason to claim that Jesus rose from the dead. They have nothing to gain but death to claim that Jesus rose from the dead. And yet we see that they are claiming it. And then we have a claim of over 500 at one time, and we have public appeal to living witnesses. So 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 5, Paul writes a creed that he received. This creed is dated to about 3 to 5 years after Jesus' resurrection. And it claims that 500 people saw Jesus' resurrection. You have the claim that the apostles and certain disciples' names saw the resurrection. So this is a public appeal. So if you, at the time, if you are a skeptic to the resurrection during Jerusalem, you can go and check these claims. You can go to one of the 500. They're constantly teaching, as we see in the book of Acts. The 500 know about it. The disciples are teaching about it. There's public appeal.
Yeah, it's a crucial thing to understand that importance there because, as the Redditor said, that it's a mythological story. If we look at stories that kind of nowadays we think of mythological, a common tract between them all is that it takes sometimes centuries, it takes at least multiple generations for these stories to actually start coming about. And the reason why is because after the people that saw it die, who are you going to ask about it now? That's why Paul writes in there, go talk to the people. He says of that over 500 people saw the risen Christ, some of them that are now no longer alive, but some of them are alive. He says that so you can go talk to them. He says that to make his claim have some evidence to it, not that, hey, just trust me, bro. I was there, I saw it, but everybody else that saw it is dead already. No, he says, go talk to those people. Those people really saw it. And that's a big difference between the Christ resurrection story and some other stories that we have in history.
How would you respond to someone who would say, well, he didn't say exactly who to ask. He just said 500 people. This could be anybody in the ancient world.
Yeah, that's a good question. But keep in mind that the book is called 1 Corinthians. He's writing to a people group in the Corinthian church. And the kind of the line that you hear thrown about is the Bible's written for us, not to us. Keep in mind that he's writing this to a people group that is a church. they're going to know the people in that church that really saw Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Those people
Yeah.
are going to be known in the community. And you say, hey, Paul told me to talk to you. What do you have to say? That's what I would answer that question with. That's a great question, though.
That was a great answer, too. And one could say, in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, we have this creed, and it claims that the disciples saw it. What if the disciples were just lying? What if they had something to gain? I'm going to go over why they have nothing to gain, and this also implies that the disciples, they went through a radical change, a radical transformation, and that leads us into fact number 4. The disciples went through this radical transformation. There's a couple passages, but first I want to read a quote from a known scholarly skeptic about the resurrection. It quotes as this: "It may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ." That's insane for a scholarly skeptic to say that. But I want to back up his information. I don't want to just appeal to authority if you were here for the logical fallacies. Number 1, the disciples went from fear to bold proclamation. There's a lot of passages, in fact, in the Gospels that talk about this. Matthew 26:56, for instance. Then all the disciples left him and fled. Luke 22. Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And then particularly the bold proclamation part we see in Acts 2. These disciples, they're proclaiming what they saw, and they're proclaiming it in the middle of the street. They're willing to die for it.
Maybe a more modern example to kind of showcase the difference between this story and some other stories that we have is, funny enough, the Watergate scandal. It's kind of the one I like to go to when I have this conversation with people. But if you look at what happens with the Christ story and with Peter or Paul, what happens is that they're threatened with death, even. And they basically just say, okay, kill me then. I mean, Peter's crucified upside down because he's not worthy to die in the same way Christ died. That's what he says, and that's kind of what his claim is. But that's the key detail, that these people get confronted with death. Say, okay, I'm not going to change my mind. I'm going to keep sharing what I believe. If you look at the Watergate scandal, again, it's a funny example. But what happens is that whole team of lawyers are constructing a court case, and they're saying these things, and they're saying things, and they're saying things. And then it kind of gets to the point where the government's like, hey, if you're lying to us, we're going to throw you in prison. And the lawyers immediately flip. And they're like, it's not even like, doesn't take time. It's like a snap of the fingers. Okay, actually, never mind. We're not going to lie anymore. We don't want to go to prison. And the reason why I share that story there is because you see the radical change has a lasting impact on these people's lives because they really believe it. It's something they know to be true, is an important talking point there. In the Watergate scandal, these people know it's a lie. If people don't die for something they know to be a lie. Keep that line in your head, because I'm sure that'll come back later in the episode.
That will certainly come back. People do not die for a lie. And you mentioned earlier that the disciples were willing to suffer and die for this, and that's exactly what we see. In Acts 12, we see the martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus, James, the brother of John. King Herod kills him. We see the martyrdom of, as you mentioned, Peter and Clement of Rome, Apostle Paul and Clement of Rome, and James, the brother of Jesus, in Josephus. And if you don't know what the Clement of Rome or Josephus is, they're important documents. Just keep them in the back of your mind.
They're extra biblical, so outside of the Bible, writings that are historically accepted. Is that correct?
Yes,
good summary.
Josephus is a enemy attestation. So Josephus has no reason to say that these people were martyred for their lie, quote unquote lie. And then Clement of Rome, he actually met a lot of these apostles. He knew them personally, so he's writing about them. And then we also see the martyrdom of Andrew, Thomas, and Philip in other historically historical documents.
That'll take us into fact 5, if you don't mind, Shiloh, right? Okay, so fact 5 we have written down is just Jewish culture. Jewish culture at a time was expecting Messiah. That is true. There's actually multiple accounts of false messiahs that rose up in the time, but then die, and then the account falls away because Jewish culture was expecting the Messiah to come. They were not expecting him to die.
No, yeah.
Secondly,
Nonetheless, they weren't expecting him to be resurrected
Yeah,
either.
that's what I was
They
gonna-
changed. Yeah. sorry.
secondly, they weren't expecting him to die, but they also, when they thought of resurrection, their idea of resurrection was at the end of time, and it's like the final resurrection, and now we get to go be with God. Is that correct, Shiloh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's they're in their head when they hear and think resurrection. That's what they're thinking. That's not what Jesus did. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus rose physically from the dead before the end time, the time when everybody else rises up.
This also backs up with the Gospels, because a lot of times in the Gospels, Jesus will foretell his death and resurrection, and you can see if you read any of the Gospels and what he's saying here. Right after the verse after, it says that the disciples did not know what Jesus was talking about. So that perfectly backs up with the Bible. Another key fact, a key thing to note is that Jesus, he changed the culture completely. It's true that Jews, they weren't stupid. They didn't know. They knew that people didn't rise from the dead. They believed that the resurrection came at the end times. They thought that their Messiah wouldn't die. They thought that their Messiah would lead them into conquering Rome, in fact, and conquering the rest of the world. But Jesus, he actually changes the Jewish culture completely after he dies, which is something never seen before. He changes the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, in fact, which the Pharisees were willing to kill over.
Maybe I'll clarify here. Jesus didn't change the Sabbath. I just want to highlight that. But he did cause a cultural change that did cause that.
Yeah.
Maybe just clarifying a little bit just for sake of people that are nitpicky on semantics and stuff. But with that being said, is there anything else you have to say, either of you two? I think that'll take us into our second break. We have a fun third segment of the show where we're actually going to put some of these facts to use, talk about some actual arguments, which is kind of the whole point. So I'm going to take us into break, and we're going to listen to one of my favorite songs. It's by a band called Relient K, called More Than Useless. So thank you guys for listening.
Welcome back to Apologetics Radio on KSDJ 90.7. My name is Shyla. I'm joined here with my co-hosts Zach and Evan. Before the break, we were talking about the 5 facts for the resurrection. I'll go over that briefly, and then we can introduce some alternative explanations, explanations that skeptics have that try and prove the resurrection, or disprove the resurrection, sorry. So fact number 1, Jesus existed. Everyone knows this. Fact number 2, empty tomb. The tomb was empty. Fact number 3, people claimed it. Many people claimed it.
Specifically eyewitnesses.
Specifically eyewitnesses, yes. Fact number 4, the disciples and many other people were willing to die. They went through a radical transformation. And finally, fact number 5, the Jewish culture hit a 180.
And in addition, they weren't expecting it. They were not expecting a bodily resurrection of Messiah.
Indeed, indeed. All right. So we're going to go over some alternative explanations. And I want you as the listener to focus on, do these alternative explanations, do they explain either the radical transformation or the empty tomb, or do they explain both? And we would argue, we would say, in fact, indefinitely, we would say that they don't provide evidence for both.
Yeah,
Only one.
Our claim here is that using historical reasoning and looking at evidence and then making the best conclusion out of that evidence, I mean, our claim is that the resurrection is the simplest explanation, which sounds weird. I understand if you're hearing that. It's like, what are they talking about? But that's what I would hold to, is that it is the simplest explanation of all the events and all of the details in the story. So let's get into it.
All right. Alternative explanation number 1. Quote, people die for false beliefs all the time. The Crusades, Islam was trying to conquer Europe. They were dying for a belief. Does that disprove the resurrection? Because these disciples were dying. First thing I have to say is people do not die for false beliefs all the time. They just don't.
Maybe I'll step in for a second. People don't die for something they know is wrong. Maybe I'll clarify that a little bit.
Right.
Is that kind of what you're saying, Shyla?
Yeah, I was gonna get to. I was building up a little bit. People die for beliefs they think are true. People do not die for a lie. If I know something is a lie and I'm being threatened to be killed because of that proclamation, I'm just gonna forfeit it.
That'd be unless you weren't actually worried that you were going to die, or that you were making enough where you could assure you weren't going to die.
Yeah. I have an example for that, but let's get through Shiloh's point first, and then I'll bring up an example.
Yeah. You can go on with your
Okay,
example.
so the claim that we're kind of responding to that is that people do die for things they believe to be true, but people don't die for something they know is wrong, or know is incorrect, know is a lie. That's what we see in the biblical account and see in the Christ story. Is that for these people to be dying, wouldn't it be something that they'd be dying for something they know or they believe is true? It'd be something they know is a lie. There's a funny skit. I think it's Nate Bargatze. I can't remember. He's a comedian. But he does a skit where all the disciples are around a campfire, and I think it's Peter is like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're all going to get together, and we're going to go steal the body of Christ. And then we're going to go preach it across all the towns in Israel, and we're going to get stoned to death for it. Doesn't that sound like fun? No, of course not. Nobody's going to go with that plan. That is what happened in the story, though, is that these people radically changed, going back to that fact 4 that we talked about. There's that radical change that isn't based on something they got taught growing up. It's not something that they were raised in Israel, so they had these beliefs, or they're raised in Egypt, so they have these beliefs, or they're raised in America, so they have these beliefs. No, it's something that they were there firsthand to see. So they would be the only people to know if it's true or not.
Yeah, I have a quote from William Lane Craig that just backs this up. That they wouldn't die for a lie. The suffering and deaths of the apostles provide evidence that they sincerely believed that they had seen the risen Jesus. Sincere belief is not sufficient for truth, but it is evidence that they were not lying.
Yeah, that's a good last sentence of that quote there.
Well, a further point was that they had zero to gain from this. I mean, you could say that maybe like a soldier is ordered to, at the point of death, to go fight for a country, but these people, they weren't forced to go out and preach that Jesus rose from the dead. Instead, they went out and did it willingly, and they still had nothing to gain besides convincing others that their point was true.
Nothing to gain and everything to lose is what I would say. You mind if I share my example really quick? It got brought up in our Thursday meeting, but the claim of you don't die for something you know is a lie. And somebody brought up, who's the, what's his name? Mormon.
Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith, the guy who started Mormonism. If you look at Joseph Smith's story, he dies for what appears to be something he believes in. So how do we as Christians conflate that with our argument that we're making here? And I think it's pretty clear when you actually look at how Joseph Smith dies. Joseph Smith dies breaking out of prison, and he gets shot. because he thought he broke out of prison. I think he was actually outside of the prison.
He was running away.
He was running away when he gets shot. So
He did not think he was going to get killed.
He thought he was scot-free. He's like, oh boy, I get to keep on going with my
And
life.
these disciples know that they are going to get killed or at least face prosecution.
Yeah, that's the difference there, is that Joseph Smith's actually actively running away thinking, I'm going to get free from death. But the disciples or apostles are walking into death. They're like, I know that if I go in here, I'm probably going to die, or I'm going to get persecuted, or people are going to be upset with me. But yeah, that's what my answer would be. The differentiation between those two situations.
Yeah, the next alternative explanation is Paul doesn't name the 500 or the 500 don't write about Jesus. My response is, if someone writes about George Washington and mentions that he was victorious over fill-in-the-blank battle against the Brits, should we expect a written documentary from the Brits or even other soldiers who helped George Washington? No, we should trust the primary source. Another one, it's just one guy claiming the resurrection.
Yeah, those are, we'll kind of take those in tandem. So point one would be that Paul doesn't specifically name the people that he's in that 1 Corinthians verse where he's saying over 500 people saw the risen Christ.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't actually name all the people. So what if he just made up a number and said, it's over 500? Or in that second point where it's just one person kind of made up the story and then maybe it expanded over time, or he got it with all of his buddies and all of his buddies decided we're going to share this message with people. There's two problems with that. So with that first point, Paul doesn't name 500 people. There's two reasons why he wouldn't do that. Number one, again, he's writing to a church. He's writing to the church in Corinth who know these people. So it'd be kind of wasted time and effort to do that.
That'd be a lot of writing.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of writing, which leads me into my second point. We have pen and paper today. We're very accustomed to how easy it is to write things down. Writing things down in ancient times was not easy. Papyrus was expensive. It basically came exclusively from Egypt. You had to pay for it to come in, to ship in, if whatever the ancient version of FedEx is. You had to pay for the papyrus to get there. You had to pay for the ink to write on it. You also had to take the time to write on it, which also took time.
It was also very rare, nonetheless. So it was rare and expensive, and it was very inconvenient rather than what we have today.
Yeah. So to kind of make the argument that if the 500 people aren't named, then I'm going to throw it out entirely and treat it as it's not even there is pretty, I don't like being mean on the radio, but it's pretty idiotic. It's
arrogant for sure.
It's pretty arrogant. That's a better word. It's pretty arrogant to say, why not? Why isn't it there? I won't trust it if it's not there.
Yeah. And another thing on the paper was that Paul was a very well-educated dude. Like, most of these people were probably just normal people who weren't even literate. So the fact that they would be able to write, if they had the materials to do so, would probably be pretty low chances of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mind if I bring up an example, Shiloh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's an example I've heard talking to people. It's kind of a more modern one, I think. But what if the 12 apostles were just high on shrooms, right?
We're going to get into that.
Yeah. Well, it's something you can hear if you go talk to a lot of people. They might have this as an option or as an answer to this.
Yeah.
Shiloh, do you want to you said you had it written down. Do you want to go into some of that, some of the details?
Yep. So as I mentioned earlier in my fact number 4, I believe, is that we have 11 different appearances. We have 11 different appearances of Jesus post-crucifixion. So there's multiple appearances. There's different locations, in fact, as well. And you have extended interaction. In some cases, people are eating and drinking with Jesus. And then that also doesn't explain the empty tomb at all.
Yeah. I'll actually expand on fact 5 that we talked about. We're talking about that Jewish culture. I'm not a psychologist, but I've had to take psychology classes at school. And one of the things I've actually learned in those classes is that our brains are really complicated. They're really smart, but they're also not limitless. One of the things our brains do is they're kind of contracted to themselves. They can't really create new ideas if they've never had any way to create those ideas. What I'm getting to, and the point I'm trying to make here, is that this kind of claim hinges on the fact that they hallucinated their interactions with Jesus. Problem with that is that would imply that they had an idea of resurrection that was different than they had.
They had to expect the resurrection, and they didn't.
Yeah, if they were actively expecting Messiah to not die, actively expecting him not to die, and that Messiah would come in the resurrection in a long time from now, in the final days, is when the final resurrection of all of the people, humans, would be. This claim that they just got high and had hallucinations isn't supported by modern psychology, that they wouldn't have actually been able to hallucinate that in the first place. That's kind of a quick little my micro psychology lecture on it, but
yeah. Another alternative explanation would be mythological development, which is silly. We have enemy attestations that say that there was early proclamation, early development, very vast spread. And then I'm gonna speed run these so I can. I'm gonna go through these last examples fairly fast so we can wrap up neatly in a bow tie. So the empty tomb could have other explanations. Let's go over some of these other explanations. The body was stolen. This doesn't work because the disciples were scattered, scared, and are in hiding. Grave robbery is punished by death, and they have nothing to gain for stealing a body.
In the biblical account, we see that Roman soldiers were actively guarding the tomb, and it makes sense for a kind of a high-profile case like this one was. But that's what's written in the Gospels. I don't necessarily know of any other extra biblical sources that I could get from there. But what I do know is that Roman soldiers were pretty talented, and they probably wouldn't have gotten beat up by a couple of disciples. Right? Even if all 12 of them came. These are soldiers. They know how to take on people. Right? I'll put it that way. But they're not going to get beat up by 12 guys.
So what if the Romans just moved the body then? That doesn't work because the authorities wanted the movement to stop. Therefore, why didn't they just produce the body? Producing the body would have ended the movement instantly. No reason to hide the body once resurrection claims erupted.
Yeah, that takes out a lot of claims. You'd be surprised how many times you can be having a conversation with somebody and they'll make a claim about the resurrection and that's why it didn't happen. And then it's like, oh, your claim's got a flaw, because if that's true, they would have just shown the body and said, hey, I found the dead guy we're talking about. He's not actually risen from the dead. He's actually still dead right there. That doesn't happen because he wasn't there. That's that third fact, I believe, is the empty tomb.
Yeah. What if he was buried in the wrong tomb? This doesn't work because, the tomb location is known. Joseph of Arimathea is named. Women watched the burial, and authorities knew the correct tomb. What if grave robbers stole it? Grave robbery is punished by death. They have nothing to gain for a corpse. They have no reason to spark a resurrection movement. And that leads me into my final point. And that is why the resurrection claim is most likely the case. It's because it explains all of these facts clearly. Evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. These bodily facts indicate that the resurrection is true. And then lastly, I want to go over not enough evidence. A lot of people say this. There's just not enough evidence that Jesus rose. And this is just not true. When will it be enough? Do we need to go back in time and record Jesus walking out of the tomb? Even then, that wouldn't be enough, because then we could easily say that the recorder was biased or that it was AI. It will never be enough evidence for those who have suppressed the truth. We need the light of Jesus to shine through the evidence. Here's an analogy to point this out. At some point, you can get so close to the cliff, having almost enough evidence to trust God and jump into the unseeable void of carrying your cross. But you need trust in Jesus to fall in. Belief in the resurrection and faith in God are two separate things.
That's a good evangelical point to end on, Shiloh. So that is our time is coming quickly to an end. So I want to thank you too for coming along and talking about this. This is something I love to talk about. I know it's a big deal. It's something that I hope you guys enjoyed listening to, but it's also something I hope you guys want to talk about. We're kind of bouncing around this idea of the challenge of this week, and we're like, what is going to be our challenge? I think this one's maybe it's just simpler than we're thinking. Talk about it with somebody. Like, really, that is the Christian method. Maybe it's not for the people that are listening and are like, Christianity's lame. But for those people that are Christians, talk about it with somebody. Engage your mind. It doesn't have to be somebody that's an unbeliever. You don't have to be out there preaching, but maybe bounce around the idea with your sister, your mother, your father, or something. Talk about these things, because it's important to have those answers prepared for when the time comes that you're confronted with them. But with that being said, I am going to pray us out, and yeah, let's do it. Father God, hallowed be your name. We are so utterly thankful for the ability to do this for us three in the room here, that we're able to talk about the things we believe and that we live in a place that's okay. We thank you for the time that we got to spend with these people that are listening to us right now. And I just ask that you bless their days as you have blessed us, and continue to be with us as we continue to walk through the rest of this day. In your name I pray. Amen. So I will send us out with another one of my favorite songs by a band called Relient K again. This one's a little fun. It's called the Sadie Hawkins Dance. So I hope you guys enjoy your week, and thank you for listening.